chance to see how Lear is living his life without any kind of responsibilities. Um, there was a I'm just going to mention something in passing. There was a King Lear that was performed by in our theater department at UTEP about 3 years ago. And you remember my colleague Jay, who came in and did some acting with us. He was involved in that production. Um, and it was a really interesting production. I mean, among other things, they had like some ringers. They brought in like a New York director, and they brought in a New York actor to play King Lear. And one of the things that was just, I thought, really interesting about that production, if you ever, I don't know if any of you were around to see it, um, but the way that they perform King Lear with his kind of riotous entourage here in the first part of Act One, um, like the New Yorker like clearly didn't I mean, I'm not a Texan myself, right? I'm from out of here, but this New Yorker had like this kind of monolithic view of what Texas is like, and not a kind of regional understanding of what Texas is like. And so, I mean, I was new here, and it still struck me as just completely odd. She had King Lear come on in like camouflage hunting vest, with like the big orange vest and like shotguns, and like all these guys with coolers full of beer cans and whatever. And it was a very sort of like good old boy, but it was definitely like an East Texas idea about King Lear. And I just thought, this is not going to play well in, like, this is not what Texas looks like out here in the far west. But anyway, I thought it was but it was an interesting production to see it. Um, okay, so but there is an aspect of truth telling to Lear in Act One, and it fairly quickly elicits from Lear a recognition that he's made a mistake about Cordelia, right? So on the one hand, his sisters, his two older daughters, and there's an allusion or a reference to this right at the end of Act One, right? So at the end of Act One, Scene One, as Cordelia is leaving and going to go off with France and get married and so on, she warns her sisters, look, you said, the words that you said, whether or not you meant them, were that you love King Lear. Let's see if you can actually live up to that. I kind of doubt that you will. And the sisters are like, well, shut up, get out of here, blah blah blah. But then when they're left alone, Goneril and Regan, this is starting around line 275 of Act One, Scene One. They talk about the idea that this is going to be difficult, right? Having your father living with you, and kind of mooching off you and all this, it's going to be hard. And he's changeable. Maybe he's senile. Maybe he's losing his grip on reality. Like, they want to get rid of this problem themselves, right? And so Goneril seems to be picking a fight at the beginning of Act One, Scene 3. She's looking for an excuse to try to offend her father so that he'll then want to go and spend some time with Regan instead of with her. And then anyway, but on to the question of truth telling at this point. So Lear is accompanied here by, on the one hand, his fool, and then on the other hand, by Kent, who has returned from his exile, or maybe never actually went into exile. He's put on a disguise, and so he pretends to be this guy called Caius, and Lear takes him into service. And then this is a way, right, because Kent is so devoted to like what he knows King Lear can be and has been in the past, and wants to get King Lear back to that place, that he's going to risk his own life, right? Because if he's in exile, if he comes back, he could be killed for it. But he's devoting himself to trying to help Lear get back to being able to see better, right? So he comes to Lear in disguise, and so between Kent and the fool, they're speaking certain truths to Lear, right? And these are the things that are, in the end, these are painful to Lear. Even like one of his entourage, the knight, one of the knights says in Act 1, Scene 4, around line 55, King, it seems like people are not treating you with the respect that you have kind of been expecting. And Lear says, I sort of thought that was true, but I didn't want to say anything about it. But if you're seeing it, then gosh, it must be true. Yeah, I don't feel like I'm getting the deference that I need. And then Oswald is like definitely trying not to give. That is, he's Goneril's servant. He's definitely trying to kind of give Lear offense by not giving him the titles, the honor, the deference that he expects. And this, just works Lear up more and more and more. And in the midst of being kind of worked up like that, the fool comes in. Now, we've had a fool character before, right? We had one in Festi in Twelfth Night, and this fool is very similar to Festi, right? I mean, he's not going to take action in the way that Festi does, right? Like Festi is, out for some amount of revenge on Malvolio, um, but they share that role of being, by being called the fool, they can say uncomfortable things, and so they're able to say the truth. And then the person who is supposed to be injured by that truthful thing, they can laugh it off as like, oh, well, that's just a fool talking. But they can also sort of take that in and think, okay, well, maybe there's some kind of truth in what this fool has to say, right? And so the fool makes a number of comments. In Act 1, Scene 4, this dialogue between them, starting at 124 and running all the way through 144 and so on, right? The fool makes this kind of like little doggerel sort of rhyme, and in the end of it, seems to be calling Lear a fool. And Lear says at 143, "Dost thou call me fool, boy?" And Fool says, "All other titles thou hast given away, that thou was born with," right? So I'm not exactly calling you a fool, but it's true that I'm not calling you a fool at the same time, right? And so and Lear is a fool, right? What the fool recognizes is that decision of A, of trusting Goneril and Regan, but B, in general, of trying to hand off authority but maintain honor and respect, that you can't really reconcile those two things. This was a foolish thing for Lear to have done, and so the fool is kind of getting Lear to see maybe he should not have done that. And Lear, I mean, he fairly quickly realizes, maybe I made a mistake here around what I did with Cordelia. um, but he gets, I mean, part of his um, ire, part of his wrath is, I mean, for the moment, it's going to be directed at Goneril, who is, treating him with less than respect. In Act 1, Scene 4, and there's a real, I mean, this kind of picks up on some of the stuff that Edmund has been talking about in his soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 2. Lear says, "Hark, nature, hear, dear goddess, suspend thy purpose if thou dost intend to make this creature," he's talking about Goneril, "this creature fruitful, into her womb convey sterility, dry up in her the organs of increase, and from her derogate body never spring a babe to honor her. If she must teen, create her child of spleen, that it may live to be thwart disnatured, torment to her. Let it stamp wrinkles in her brow of youth, with cadent tears fret channels in her cheeks, turn all her mother's pains and benefits to laughter and contempt, that she may feel how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child," right? You, Goneril, are not living up to that natural bond that a daughter is supposed to have with her father, which, by the way, is what Cordelia has said she had all along. Did you have a question, Julie?
Yeah, what lines were they?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's Act 1, Scene 4, around line 268. It's on page 32 if you have the same text as me.
How do I take that off? Oh, okay. Line 268.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Hark, nature, hear, dear goddess, right? Anyway, so now Lear is starting to recognize, like, Cordelia, I mean, he says a couple lines earlier than that, line 261, "O most small fault, how ugly didst thou in Cordelia show, that like an engine wrenched my frame of nature from the fixed place and drew my heart and love and added to the gall." Right, so now he recognizes, what Cordelia did was not something that I should have reacted so strongly to. I kind of regret that. And you, Goneril, you're not living up to those words that you said about how much you love me and so on. You are an unthankful child. And again, a little bit later, and like there's so many little bits that kind of refer to things we've been talking about together, right? That idea about fertility and generation, stuff like that, that picks up on Lady Macbeth and her ideas about childlessness. And a little bit later here, at line 295 or so, Lear starts crying, right? He's tearful about how much he's been disrespected by his daughter, and he says, "Life and death, I am ashamed that thou, Goneril, hast power to shake my manhood thus, that these hot tears that break from me perforce should make the worst blasts and fogs upon me," right? You're making me less manly, right? You're making me like doubt my virility and so on, because it's so painful to me that you're betraying me, after I've trusted you and put so much into you know into you, right? Okay, so anyway, oh, sorry. So you've got the fool who is telling Lear uncomfortable truths, which he sometimes listens to and sometimes pretends not to hear. You've got Kent, who wants Lear to see better and who is trying to help Lear come to an understanding of the truth. You've got Cordelia, who just doesn't flatter, right? She is, persists in telling Lear the truth of things. And I just want to mention that there's one thing that you might note. This would be hard to notice, I think, probably the first time you read through the play. But one thing that happens in the play is that Cordelia is absent from the play uh, in every scene where the fool is. And so in performance, there's a pretty powerful tradition of having the um, the the actor who plays Cordelia also often plays the fool. She's wearing different clothes when she's the fool, and that as a result, you get a way in which that Cordelia and the fool are both figures who are trying to kind of they have affection, they love and defer to Lear, but they're also trying to get Lear to see better, to understand the truth in a different way. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So we'll have our lecture again a week from now in the middle part of King Lear. But does anybody have any questions you wanted to ask?